Elena Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished cleaning the last table in the upscale restaurant. The clock on the wall showed 2:30 a.m., and her feet ached from standing for 14 hours straight. She had been working double shifts for 3 months now, ever since her mother's medical bills started piling up like mountains of unpaid debt. The restaurant, Bella Court, was not just any ordinary place. It sat in the heart of the city's most exclusive district, where wealthy businessmen made deals over expensive wine and where whispers of power echoed through marble corridors. Elena knew the rumors about who really owned this place, but she needed the job too desperately to ask questions. Her hands trembled as she counted her tips for the night. $47. It wasn't nearly enough to cover her mother's chemotherapy treatment scheduled for next week. The hospital had already called twice this week, threatening to stop the treatment if the payment didn't come through soon. Elena's mind wandered to her mother lying in that sterile hospital bed, her once vibrant face now pale and thin. Maria Martinez had raised Elena alone after her father disappeared when she was 7. Now, at 25, Elena felt the crushing weight of being her mother's only hope. The restaurant's back door suddenly creaked open, making Elena jump. She turned to see Vincent Romano walking in, his expensive black suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. Vincent was the restaurant's night manager, but Elena suspected he was much more than that. His cold blue eyes seemed to see everything. And other employees spoke about him in hushed, fearful tones. "Still here, Elena?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying an edge that made her stomach tighten. "Just finishing up, sir. I'll be done in 5 minutes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty restaurant. "We need to talk." Those 4 words sent a chill down Elena's spine. In her experience, nothing good ever followed that phrase. She set down her cleaning cloth and faced him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Is everything okay?" she managed to ask. Vincent pulled out his phone and showed her a video. Elena's blood ran cold as she watched herself on the screen, taking leftover food from the kitchen and putting it in her bag. The timestamp showed it was from 3 nights ago. "I can explain," she started, but Vincent held up his hand to silence her. Elena Martinez, 25 years old, single mother to no children, but caring for Maria Martinez, age 52, currently receiving cancer treatment at St. Mary's Hospital. Vincent recited the information like he was reading from a file. "You've been taking food from our kitchen for the past 2 months. Elena's legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of a nearby chair to steady herself. I was just taking food that was going to be thrown away. I wasn't stealing anything that would be missed." "Theft is theft, Elena. Our policies are very clear about this." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. "Please, I need this job. My mother is dying and I can't afford to feed both of us. The leftover bread and soup." "It was just going in the trash anyway." Vincent studied her face with those penetrating blue eyes. "Unfortunately, Mr. Carlucci doesn't tolerate theft from his employees, no matter the circumstances." At the mention of Mr. Carlucci's name, Elena's heart sank completely. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that name, though most people were too smart to say it out loud. Marco Carlucci was rumored to control half the businesses in the city, and those rumors came with whispered stories of people who crossed him and simply disappeared. "When will you tell him?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I already have. He wants to see you in his office. Now." Elena's knees nearly buckled. She had never seen Marco Carlucci in person, only heard the staff talk about him in nervous whispers. Some said he was ruthless, but fair. Others claimed he was a monster who showed no mercy to anyone who betrayed his trust. Vincent motioned for her to follow him. They walked through the restaurant's main dining room, past tables that had hosted countless secret meetings and business deals. Elena's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Would they just fire her? Would they press charges, or would something worse happen to her? They reached a door at the back of the restaurant that Elena had never seen opened. Vincent knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 more times. A deep voice from inside called, "Enter." Vincent opened the door and gestured for Elena to go in first. The office was nothing like she expected. Instead of the dark, intimidating space she had imagined, it was surprisingly warm and elegant. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, and behind it sat a man who looked younger than she had expected. Marco Carlucci was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and intense green eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He was handsome in a dangerous way, the kind of man her mother had always warned her to stay away from. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, and a gold watch gleamed on his wrist. "Elena Martinez," he said, standing up from his chair. His voice was smooth but carried an underlying authority that made her want to step backward. "Please sit down." Elena remained standing, too nervous to move. "Mr. Carlucci, I can explain about the food. I know it was wrong, but—" "Sit down," he repeated, and this time it wasn't a request. Elena quickly took the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Marco walked around the desk and leaned against its edge, studying her with those piercing green eyes. "Vincent tells me you've been taking food from my kitchen," he said. "Yes, sir, but only things that were going to be thrown away. I never took anything that customers would eat. Just old bread and soup that—" Marco held up his hand, and Elena immediately fell silent. "Why?" The simple question caught her off guard. "Why? Why were you taking the food? Vincent mentioned your mother, but I want to hear it from you." Elena took a shaky breath. "My mother has cancer. Stage 3. The treatments are expensive, and I can barely afford the hospital bills, let alone food for both of us. I work double shifts here 6 days a week, but it's still not enough. I saw all that perfectly good food going in the trash, and I thought maybe no one would notice if I took a little." Marco listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment that stretched on forever. "How much do you make here per week?" he finally asked. "About $300, including tips." Marco nodded slowly. "And your mother's medical expenses?" "The chemotherapy costs $1,500 per session. She needs them twice a month." Elena watched as Marco did the math in his head. $300 a week wasn't even close to covering $3,000 a month in medical bills, let alone rent and other expenses. "You've been working here for 8 months, Marco said. "Vincent tells me you're never late, you never complain about overtime, and customers specifically ask for you when they make reservations. Is that correct?" Elena nodded, surprised that he knew so much about her work performance. Marco walked back around his desk and sat down. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, which he placed on the desk between them. "This is your personnel file, Elena, but it also contains some additional information that Vincent has been gathering about your situation." Elena's stomach dropped. "What kind of information?" "Your mother's medical records, your financial situation, your apartment lease, your student loans." Marco opened the folder and flipped through several pages. "You graduated college with a degree in business, but you're working as a waitress because it pays better than entry-level office jobs. You have $43,000 in student debt. Your rent is $800 a month for a one-bedroom apartment that you share with your mother, and you haven't bought yourself new clothes in over a year." Elena stared at him in shock. "How do you know all of that?" "I make it my business to know about the people who work for me, especially when they start stealing from me." The word stealing hit Elena like a physical blow. "Mr. Carlucci, please don't fire me. I know what I did was wrong, but I promise it will never happen again. I'll pay back the value of everything I took. I'll work extra shifts without pay. Please, I'm begging you. Without this job, my mother will die." Marco studied her for another long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Elena, I have a proposition for you." Elena's heart raced. "A proposition?" "Your current situation is unsustainable. You're drowning in debt and medical bills, and no amount of double shifts at this restaurant is going to change that. You need a real solution." Elena nodded eagerly, hoping this meant he might offer her a better position or a raise. Marco leaned forward in his chair. "I need a wife." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena was sure she had misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" "I need a wife, Elena. Not for love, not for romance, but for business. There are certain aspects of my work that require me to appear settled and respectable. A family man is taken more seriously in certain circles." Elena's mouth fell open. She couldn't have been more shocked if he had asked her to rob a bank. Marco continued as if he had just suggested they discuss the weather. "In exchange for agreeing to marry me, I would pay off all of your mother's medical expenses, your student loans, and provide you with a monthly allowance of $10,000. You would live in my house, attend social functions with me when necessary, and maintain the appearance of being my devoted wife." Elena's mind reeled. "You want me to marry you? But you don't even know me." "I know enough. You're loyal, hardworking, and desperate enough to agree to my terms. Most importantly, you understand that survival sometimes requires making difficult choices." Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. You're asking me to marry a complete stranger for money." Marco's expression remained calm. "I'm offering you a solution to an impossible situation. Your mother has maybe 6 months left without proper treatment. With my help, she could live for years." The mention of her mother's limited time hit Elena like a punch to the gut. She had been trying not to think about what the doctor had told her last week, that without consistent treatment, her mother's cancer would progress rapidly. "This is crazy," Elena whispered, more to herself than to him. Marco stood up and walked around the desk again. "Elena, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his eyes. "I'm not a good man," he said quietly, "but I'm offering you a chance to save your mother's life and secure your own future. All you have to do is play a role. Be my wife in public. And in private, you can live your own life." Elena's mind was spinning. "What about love? What about finding someone I actually care about? Love is a luxury you can't afford right now, but with my money you could afford almost anything else." Elena sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. "I need time to think about this." Marco shook his head. "I need an answer tonight. My associates are expecting to meet my wife at a business dinner next Friday. That gives us exactly 1 week to make this arrangement official." "1 week?" Elena's voice cracked. "Elena." Marco's voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother's next treatment is scheduled for Monday. Without payment, they'll cancel it. You don't have time to think about this." Elena buried her face in her hands. Everything he was saying was true. She was completely out of options. And her mother was running out of time. "If I say yes," she said slowly, not looking up, "what would be expected of me?" Marco sat back down. "You would move into my house immediately. We would have a small private ceremony this weekend. You would accompany me to business dinners and social events. You would be polite, charming, and supportive in public. In private, you would have your own room, your own space, and your own life." Elena finally looked up at him. "And if I say no?" Marco's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Then you're fired for theft, and I'll make sure no restaurant in this city will hire you. Your mother's treatment stops Monday, and you'll both end up on the street within a month." The threat was delivered so calmly that it was even more terrifying. Elena realized that this wasn't really a choice at all. Marco Carlucci was offering her a lifeline, but it was the only one he was willing to throw. Elena closed her eyes and thought of her mother's face, pale and hopeful, despite the pain she was enduring. She thought of the unpaid bills stacked on their kitchen table and the phone calls from debt collectors that had become a daily nightmare. When she opened her eyes, Marco was still watching her with those intense green eyes, waiting for an answer that would change her entire life. "If I agree to this," she said quietly, "how do I know you'll keep your word about my mother's treatment?" Marco pulled out his phone and made a call. "Dr. Patterson, this is Marco Carlucci. I need you to prepare for a new patient, Maria Martinez. Yes, I'll be covering all expenses. I want her to receive the best possible care." Elena watched in stunned silence as he arranged for her mother's immediate treatment with what was clearly a very expensive private oncologist. When he hung up, he looked at Elena. "Dr. Patterson is one of the best cancer specialists on the East Coast. Your mother will receive treatment tomorrow morning." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Marco was quiet for a moment. "Because I recognize desperation when I see it, and I respect people who will do anything to protect the ones they love." Elena realized that Marco Carlucci had probably saved her mother's life with a single phone call. The weight of that reality, combined with the impossible situation she found herself in, made her decision for her. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." "What?" Elena took a deep breath and looked directly into his eyes. "Okay, I'll marry you." The next morning, Elena woke up in a bedroom that cost more than her annual salary. Silk curtains filtered golden sunlight through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the bed she had slept in was larger than her entire apartment's living room. She sat up slowly, wondering if the previous night had been some kind of strange dream. A soft knock on the door reminded her that it was all very real. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair, entered carrying a silver tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Carlucci," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Rosa, the housekeeper. Mr. Marco asked me to bring you breakfast and help you get settled." Elena's stomach churned at being called Mrs. Carlucci. The wedding had been a blur of paperwork and signatures at the city hall yesterday afternoon. Marco had arranged everything with the efficiency of someone who was used to making impossible things happen quickly. "Thank you, Rosa. You can call me Elena." Rosa set the tray on the bedside table and studied Elena with maternal concern. "You look tired, dear. This must all be very overwhelming." Elena appreciated the kindness in Rosa's voice. "It's a lot to process. Mr. Marco is a good man, even if he seems cold sometimes. He's just learned to protect himself," Rosa said, adjusting the curtains. "Your mother is doing well, by the way. He had me call the hospital this morning. Dr. Patterson says her treatment went perfectly yesterday." Relief flooded through Elena. Whatever else happened, her mother was receiving the medical care she needed. That knowledge made everything else bearable. After Rosa left, Elena explored her new home. The mansion was like something from a movie. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. Every room was perfectly decorated, but there was something cold about the perfection, as if no one actually lived there. She found Marco in his study, sitting behind a massive desk covered with papers and multiple phones. He looked up when she entered, and she noticed dark circles under his eyes. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Well, thank you. Rosa said my mother's treatment went smoothly." Marco nodded. "Dr. Patterson is optimistic about her response to the new treatment protocol." They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Elena realized they were now married, but they barely knew each other beyond the basic facts of their arrangement. "I have some rules we need to discuss," Marco said, gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. Elena sat down, bracing herself for whatever restrictions he was about to impose. "First, you have complete freedom during the day. You can go anywhere you want, do whatever you want. but I need to know your general whereabouts for security reasons." Elena nodded, surprised by how reasonable that sounded. "Second, there will be times when I need you to accompany me to business dinners or social events. You'll need to dress appropriately and act the part of my devoted wife." What does act the part mean exactly? Marco seemed to consider his words carefully. Be charming, supportive, and interested in the conversation. Smile when I introduce you. Touch my arm occasionally. Small gestures that suggest we're genuinely married. Elena felt her cheeks warm at the thought of pretending to be affectionate with this intimidating stranger. "Third," Marco continued, "never ask questions about my business dealings. Ever. What you don't know can't hurt you." The way he said it made Elena realize that there were probably things about Marco's work that she really didn't want to know. "Fourth, if anyone asks about our relationship, we met when you were working at the restaurant. We fell in love quickly and decided to get married. Keep the story simple and consistent." Elena memorized the details, understanding that their fake love story needed to be believable. And finally, Marco said, his voice becoming gentler, "You're safe here, Elena. No one will hurt you as long as you're my wife. But that protection comes with responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" Before Marco could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression hardened. "I need to take this," he said, gesturing for her to stay seated. Elena listened as Marco spoke in rapid Italian, his voice becoming increasingly tense. Even though she couldn't understand the words, she could tell he was arguing with whoever was on the other end of the call. When he hung up, Marco looked at Elena with an expression she hadn't seen before, concern mixed with something that looked like fear. "We have a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" Marco stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. "Someone has been asking questions about you, about us, about why I suddenly got married." Elena's blood ran cold. "Who?" "People who don't believe in coincidences. People who think our marriage is some kind of strategic move." Elena realized that being Marco's wife meant inheriting his enemies, and she had no idea how dangerous those enemies might be. "Are we in danger?" she asked. Marco turned back to her. "Not if we're convincing. Tonight we're attending a dinner party at the Romano family's estate. It's important that we appear completely authentic as a married couple." Elena's stomach knotted with anxiety. "I don't know how to act like a Mafia wife." "Don't think of it that way. Just act like a woman who's deeply in love with her husband." "But I'm not in love with you." Marco studied her face for a moment. "Then you'll have to pretend very convincingly, because our lives might depend on it." The rest of the day was spent preparing Elena for her debut as Marco's wife. Rosa helped her choose a dress, an elegant black cocktail dress that fit her perfectly and probably cost more than Elena used to make in a month. A stylist came to do her hair and makeup, transforming her from a tired waitress into someone who looked like she belonged in Marco's world. Elena barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was sophisticated and polished, nothing like the exhausted girl who had begged for her job just 2 days ago. That evening, as they drove to the Romano estate, Marco briefed her on the people they would meet. "Anthony Romano is the head of the family. He's been suspicious of my business expansion lately, and our sudden marriage will make him even more curious. His wife, Sophia, seems sweet, but reports everything back to her husband. Their son Vincent works for me, as you know, but his loyalty is ultimately to his father." Elena remembered Vincent from the restaurant and how uncomfortable he had always made her feel. "What exactly does Anthony suspect?" Marco was quiet for a moment. "He thinks I'm planning to challenge his authority in certain business territories. Our marriage makes it look like I'm settling down and preparing for a long-term strategy." "Are you?" Elena asked. then immediately regretted the question. Marco glanced at her with a slight smile. What did I say about asking questions about my business? They arrived at the Romano estate just as the sun was setting. The mansion was even larger than Marco's house, with imposing stone columns and elaborate fountains. Elena felt increasingly nervous as they walked up the front steps. Remember, Marco said quietly as they approached the front door, we're madly in love. Before Elena could respond, Marco slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her closer. The gesture felt surprisingly natural, and Elena found herself leaning into his warmth. The front door opened to reveal Vincent Romano, who looked surprised to see Elena. Marco, Elena, Vincent said, his tone carefully neutral. My parents are excited to meet your new wife. As they entered the lavish foyer, Elena noticed how Vincent's eyes followed her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She wondered if he suspected that their marriage was arranged. Anthony Romano was a large man with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His handshake was firm, and he studied Elena like he was trying to read her thoughts. So you're the woman who finally captured Marco's heart, Anthony said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm the lucky one, Elena replied, looking up at Marco with what she hoped appeared to be adoration. Marco's response surprised her. He looked down at her with an expression of such tenderness that for a moment, Elena almost believed it was real. We both are, Marco said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. The gesture sent an unexpected flutter through Elena's chest. She reminded herself that it was all an act, but Marco was a very convincing actor. Sophia Romano was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an elegant manner. She immediately took Elena under her wing, introducing her to the other wives at the party while peppering her with questions about her background and relationship with Marco. Elena stuck to their agreed-upon story, describing how they had met at the restaurant and fallen in love quickly. She found herself embellishing details about their courtship, making up romantic stories about late-night conversations and surprise dates. It must have been quite a whirlwind romance, Sophia said with a knowing smile. Marco never seemed like the type to settle down. Sometimes you just know when you've found the right person, Elena replied, surprised by how naturally the lies came to her. Meanwhile, Elena watched Marco across the room as he spoke with the other men. He commanded respect without saying much, and she could see how other people deferred to him. There was a power in his quiet confidence that was both attractive and intimidating. During dinner, Elena sat beside Marco at a table that probably cost more than her mother's hospital bills. The conversation flowed around topics she didn't understand: business dealings, mutual acquaintances, and thinly veiled discussions about territory and respect. Marco's hand found hers under the table, and he squeezed it gently whenever she looked nervous. The small gesture was comforting, and Elena found herself relaxing despite the high-stakes environment. Elena, dear, Anthony said during dessert, what do you think of married life so far? Elena felt all eyes turn to her. This was clearly some kind of test, and she knew her answer would be analyzed for any hint of deception. It's everything I hoped it would be, she said, looking directly at Marco. I wake up every morning feeling grateful that I found someone who loves me so completely. Marco's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. And you, Marco? Sophia asked. How has marriage changed you? Marco lifted Elena's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles softly. Elena makes me want to be a better man, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, and Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The way he said it sounded so genuine that she almost forgot they were pretending. After dinner, the men retreated to Anthony's study for drinks and business talk, leaving the women in the elegant living room. Elena listened to stories about children and vacation homes, contributing when appropriate but mostly observing the dynamics between these powerful women. When the evening finally ended and they were driving home, Elena felt emotionally exhausted from maintaining her performance. "You did well tonight," Marco said as they pulled into his driveway. "It was harder than I expected." Marco turned off the car but made no move to get out. "Elena, there's something you should know about the life you've entered." She turned to face him in the dim light of the car's interior. "These people, my associates, they're not just business partners. They're family in a way, and family members protect each other, but they also watch each other very carefully. Any sign of weakness or deception can be dangerous." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying they suspect something about us?" "I'm saying that from now on, we need to be more convincing. Tonight was just the beginning. There will be more dinners, more parties, more opportunities for people to study our relationship and look for cracks in our story." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the weight of what they had gotten themselves into. "Marco," Elena said quietly, "when you said I make you want to be a better man, did you mean that?" Marco was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wasn't going to answer. "I meant it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena felt something shift between them in that moment. The arrangement was still fake, the marriage still a business transaction, but something real was beginning to grow beneath the surface. As they walked into the house together, Elena realized that the most dangerous thing about pretending to be in love with Marco Carlucci might be that she was starting to forget it was pretend. 3 months into their marriage, Elena's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her mother's health had improved dramatically under Dr. Patterson's care, and the constant worry about money had been replaced by a different kind of anxiety, the growing realization that her feelings for Marco were becoming dangerously real. Elena spent her days visiting her mother at the private treatment facility Marco had arranged, shopping with Rosa, or reading in the mansion's beautiful library. It was a peaceful existence, but she felt like she was living in a beautiful cage, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marco, meanwhile, had become increasingly protective of her. He insisted on having security follow her when she left the house, and he called several times a day to check on her whereabouts. Elena told herself it was just part of maintaining their arrangement, but sometimes she caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her wonder if his feelings were changing too. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Elena was alone in the mansion, reading in the library, when she heard the front door slam with unusual force. Moments later, Marco appeared in the doorway, his suit jacket torn and a cut above his left eyebrow bleeding. "Marco!" Elena jumped up from her chair. "What happened?" "It's nothing," he said, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands were clenched into fists. Elena approached him cautiously. "You're bleeding." "Elena, go to your room, lock the door." The urgency in his voice frightened her. "What's wrong?" Before Marco could answer, his phone rang. He answered it immediately, speaking in rapid Italian. Elena caught enough words to understand that something had gone very wrong with a business meeting. When he hung up, Marco looked at Elena with an expression she had never seen before. Fear mixed with rage. "We need to leave. Now." "Leave? Why?" Marco grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. "Elena, someone tried to kill me tonight. They failed, but they know about you now. We're not safe here." Elena's world tilted. The comfortable bubble of their fake marriage suddenly popped, revealing the dangerous reality underneath. "Who tried to kill you?" "Questions later. Moving now." Marco was already heading for the stairs. "Pack only essentials. We leave in 10 minutes. Elena ran to her room, her heart pounding. She threw clothes into a suitcase with shaking hands, her mind racing with questions and fears. This was the part of Marco's world she had tried not to think about. The violence, the danger, the possibility that people might die over business disagreements. When she came back downstairs, Marco was waiting by the front door with two large men she had never seen before. One of them took her suitcase without a word. "Rosa?" Elena asked, suddenly worried about the kind housekeeper. "She's safe. She's staying with her sister until this is resolved," Marco assured her. They left through the back entrance, where a black SUV was waiting with its engine running. As they drove through the dark streets, Elena noticed they were being followed by at least two other vehicles. "Marco, I'm scared," Elena admitted quietly. Marco reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Elena. I promise." The conviction in his voice was absolute, and Elena realized that somewhere along the way, Marco's protection of her had become about more than their business arrangement. They drove for over an hour before arriving at a large house on the outskirts of the city. Elena could see armed men positioned around the property, and floodlights illuminated every corner of the grounds. "What is this place?" Elena asked as they got out of the car. "Safe house," Marco replied. "We'll stay here until I can figure out who's behind the attack and eliminate the threat." The casual way he said, "eliminate the threat," sent a chill through Elena. She was reminded that her husband, fake or not, was capable of violence she had only read about in newspapers. Inside the safe house, Marco immediately began making phone calls while Elena sat on a couch in the living room, trying to process what was happening. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She wasn't just pretending to be married to a businessman. She was married to someone who had enemies willing to kill, and by extension, she had become a target too. Vincent Romano arrived an hour later, his face grim. Elena watched from across the room as he spoke with Marco in hushed tones, their conversation too quiet for her to hear. When Vincent left, Marco came over and sat beside Elena on the couch. He looked exhausted and older than his 32 years. "The attack was ordered by the Benedetto family," Marco said quietly. "They're trying to move into my territory, and they see our marriage as a sign that I'm getting soft, focusing on domestic life instead of business." "Are you getting soft?" Elena asked. Marco looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe I am." The admission hung between them like a bridge they were both afraid to cross. "Elena, I need to tell you something," Marco said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "When I first proposed this arrangement, it was purely business. I needed a wife for appearances, and you needed money for your mother's treatment." Elena nodded, her heart beginning to race. "But somewhere along the way, things changed for me. The way you take care of your mother, the way you light up when you talk about books, the way you make Rosa laugh in the kitchen." Marco paused, running his hand through his hair. "I've fallen in love with my fake wife." Elena felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Marco, I know this complicates everything. I know you didn't sign up for real feelings, but I needed you to know, especially now when we might not have much time." Elena stared at him, trying to process his confession. "What do you mean, we might not have much time?" Marco's expression darkened. "The Benedetto family won't stop until I'm dead or out of the picture. And as long as you're my wife, you're in danger too." Elena felt a surge of fear, but it was mixed with something else, a fierce protectiveness she hadn't expected. "Then we fight back," she said firmly. Marco looked surprised. "Elena, this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is." Elena stood up, pacing to the window. "These people want to kill my husband. They want to destroy the life we've built together. Maybe it started as fake, but it's real now. At least it is for me." Marco stood up slowly. "What are you saying?" Elena turned to face him, her decision crystallizing. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you too, Marco Carlucci, and I'm not going to run away just because things get dangerous." Marco crossed the room in 3 quick strides and cupped her face in his hands. Elena, you don't understand what you're saying. This world, my world, it destroys everything good that touches it. Then maybe it's time for something good to change your world instead of the other way around. Marco searched her eyes as if looking for any sign of doubt. When he found none, he kissed her with a passion that had nothing to do with their public performances. This kiss was real, desperate, and full of months of suppressed feelings. When they broke apart, both breathless, Elena realized that everything had changed between them in a matter of minutes. If we do this, if we make this marriage real, there's no going back, Marco warned. You'll be my wife in every sense, which means you'll always be in danger. You'll always have to be careful, always have to watch your back. Elena thought of her mother, healthy and laughing again thanks to Marco's intervention. She thought of Rosa's warmth, of the security she felt in Marco's arms, of the way her heart raced every time he walked into a room. I'd rather live dangerously with you than safely without you, she said. Marco's smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. Then, we need to end this threat once and for all. Over the next week, Elena watched Marco transform into someone she had never seen before. Gone was the controlled businessman who carefully maintained his image. In his place was a strategic warrior who planned each move with deadly precision. Elena insisted on being part of the planning despite Marco's protests. If I'm going to be your real wife, then I need to understand your real life, she argued. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Marco would arrange a meeting with the Benedetto family, ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty. But the meeting would be a trap, with Marco's allies positioned to end the threat permanently. The night before the meeting, Elena lay awake in Marco's arms in their shared bed at the safe house. They had finally consummated their marriage 3 days earlier, and Elena was amazed by the tenderness Marco showed her in private. Are you having second thoughts? Marco asked softly, sensing her restlessness. About us? Never. About tomorrow? I'm terrified. Marco tightened his arms around her. I've survived in this world for 15 years, Elena. I'm not planning to stop now, especially when I finally have something worth surviving for. Elena turned to face him in the darkness. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when this is over, we'll have a real wedding, with our real families, real vows, real everything. Marco kissed her forehead gently. I promise. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. The meeting with the Benedetto family took place at a restaurant in neutral territory. Elena waited at the safe house, surrounded by Marco's most trusted men, watching the news and praying that everything would go according to plan. When Marco's phone call came 4 hours later, Elena answered on the first ring. It's over, he said simply. Elena closed her eyes in relief. All of it? All of it. The Benedetto threat is eliminated, and I've reached agreements with the other families to respect our boundaries. You're safe, Elena. We're safe. 6 months later, Elena stood in a beautiful church, wearing a white dress that cost more than her old apartment. Surrounded by friends and family, some legitimate, some questionable, but all genuinely happy for the couple. Her mother, now in remission and glowing with health, served as her maid of honor. Rosa wept tears of joy as she watched Elena and Marco exchange real vows this time. As Marco slipped a new wedding ring onto Elena's finger, a diamond so large it caught the light from every angle, he whispered words meant only for her. Thank you for saving me, Elena. Thank you for not firing me, she whispered back, and they both laughed. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife and told Marco he could kiss his bride, Elena felt like her real life was finally beginning. The kiss was tender but passionate, full of promise and genuine love. Later, at the reception in the garden of their home, Elena watched Marco dancing with her mother, both of them laughing at something he had said. She realized that the terrified girl who had begged for her job had grown into a woman who was strong enough to love a dangerous man and confident enough to believe she could handle whatever challenges their life together might bring. Vincent Romano approached her as she stood watching the dancing. "You know, I never thought Marco would actually fall in love," Vincent said with a smile that was warmer than any expression Elena had ever seen from him. "What made you think he did?" "The way he looked when he thought someone was going to hurt you. I've never seen Marco scared before that night, but the thought of losing you terrified him." Elena looked across the garden at her husband, who was now being thoroughly charmed by her mother's stories about Elena's childhood. He caught her eye and winked, and Elena felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt the very first time he looked at her with genuine affection. "Mrs. Carlucci?" Rosa appeared at Elena's elbow with a glass of champagne. Elena accepted the glass and smiled at the name. It had taken some getting used to, but now it felt like it had always belonged to her. "Mrs. Carlucci," she repeated, savoring the words. "I think I like the sound of that." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Elena and Marco stood together on the front steps of their home, waving goodbye to family and friends. "Any regrets?" Marco asked, as the last car disappeared down the driveway. Elena thought about the question seriously. Her life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. She had married a man she barely knew, entered a world of danger and violence, and fallen in love against all odds. "Just one," she said finally. Marco's expression grew concerned. "What?" Elena smiled and kissed him softly. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one." Marco pulled her closer, and they stood together on the threshold of their home, looking out at a future that was uncertain but bright with possibility. Elena had learned that love could grow in the most unlikely places, that strength could be found in the most desperate circumstances, and that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as disasters. As they turned to go back inside their house, their real home, built on real love, Elena thought about the scared waitress who had begged for her job in that restaurant office. That girl would never have believed that her plea would lead to the greatest love story of her life. But then again, the best love stories always begin with someone taking a chance on something impossible.